I haven't heard that before.
You must have pushed a new button.
Guess so.
I've heard that you can record Zoom meetings, and so if people aren't there, then they can look at them. And
Yeah, that's what.
This is something absolutely new because it comes up on my screen.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because this meeting is being recorded. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to be recorded. Continue. And you have to press continue or leave meeting.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe it might be a consent thing. Yeah, you know.
yeah,
Recorded for the church website. So
So
anyway,
each click continue, huh?
Yep.
Okay.
so Saint Anselm of Canterbury, who lived from 1033 to 1109, is considered one of the most important Christian thinkers, especially in the medieval church. He is ranked along with Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas in terms of being a philosopher and some of the things he wrote.
Was he an anchorite?
Yeah.
If he's not an anchorite, I'm not interested. Just kidding, just kidding.
Yeah, she's one of my favorites. Jillian of Norwich was. The interesting life, interesting things that she wrote. So Anselm was born in Aosta, a border town in the Kingdom of Burgundy, which is in northwestern Italy.
What? The Burgundians ruled Italy then?
I think it was an independent kingdom at that point. Burgundy was a separate country from Italy.
Oh.
You know, back when Europe was divided up into smaller kingdoms. It was a strategic location because it was at the juncture of the Great Bernard and Little St. Bernard trade routes. And this is just to show you where it's located.
Look at these pictures.
Does he touch Italy? I mean, touch
And
France?
he is Italian. That's
Yeah.
his. Huh.
Yeah, here we go. So
Yeah.
northwestern Italy, on the border of Italy and Switzerland, basically.
You want to bring your stuff over here?
Not till I finish eating.
And then this is the picture of Aosta today. So you see it's a very mountainous region.
Picture
And-
here.
And here the trade, this is the Great St. Bernard trade route, and the Little St. Bernard trade route. Of course, that goes to the famous St. Bernard Pass. And the whole reason they bred St. Bernards to go out and rescue stranded people in the snow and their barrels around their necks with their brandy. So you know it's a very mountainous and snowy region. But it was, in terms of trade between Italy and you know, this part of Europe, Switzerland and onto France, that was the trade route to get through there. So it was important for trade, so important location politically because of that. That's where he was from. So his mother was Ermenberga, and she was from a noble Burgundian family.
Okay, that's not an Italian woman's name.
No, you don't think so?
No,
No.
it has Germanic.
It sounds Germanic.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, you know, it's on the border of Switzerland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, like Switzerland, the region between Switzerland and Italy, like the northernmost region of Italy, it's basically bilingual. It's German and Italian.
Oh, yeah.
And southern, you know, there's debate. Switzerland and was it Bavaria? It's one of the southern German countries. I think it may be Switzerland and Italy debate with each other who actually invented the accordion, because it was invented there on the border, you know.
What was
So
it?
there's certainly a lot of cultural overlap when you get into a border between two countries.
I don't know. Accordion?
Yeah, yeah, it's probably southern Switzerland, but the Italians say no, it was northern Italy. So So Anselm's father was Gandolfo. who
No,
was a-
there's the Italian name.
right. He was a Lombard nobleman who had plans for Anselm to take on a career in politics. However, Anselm did not agree with his father, and as an adolescent, he decided he wanted to be a monk. Gandolfo did not like that idea and would not approve of him becoming a monk. I think he was about 16, 15 or 16 at the time. Oh, 15. In fact, in spite of his father's wishes, he went and applied. And the monk said, no, we can't do that. You're only 15. Can't do that without your father's consent. So he
Every 15-year-old wants to be a monk.
I know, right? What's up with that? So he was upset about it. He prayed that he would become ill because if he got sick, he would be able to enter the monastery.
Oh, no.
The good news for Anselm is he got seriously ill. The bad news is he still refused admission to.
Oh my gosh.
Guy is serious.
That's it.
So his prayer was answered, but not the prayer to get into the monastery. God said, okay, you can get sick. So eventually, he got older, and as a young man, he left and headed towards the Alps to France, eventually arriving at Bec, Normandy, which is the northern border of France on the ocean. And there he did study under, at that time, an eminent theologian named Lanfranc. He devoted himself to scholarship and was finally able to achieve his childhood dream of becoming a monk. Like you said, don't all teenagers want to be a monk? I don't get that either. That's really unusual. So at that point, he was studying at Bec, and he was deciding between becoming a monk at Bec or Cluny, or maybe becoming a hermit and living off of his inheritance, which I'm almost surprised his father let him have at that point, but he did, I guess. And so he couldn't decide. He put that decision in the hands of Lanfranc and Maurilius, who was the Archbishop of Rouen. And they decided he should be a monk. And he entered the monastery in 1060.
Hmm.
Let's see, when...
27 years old.
How much?
So,
27 years old.
27.
He was born in
so,
1033.
Yeah, okay. I was just going to backtrack and see how old he was. Yeah.
so the bishop let him become a monk and they took the money and ran, right?
Yeah, there may be something to that.
Those two were his community of faith, making a decision.
Right?
Well, in that case, it was a decision. not-
Yeah, I wonder, there was a little self-interest there with some money involved, right?
Sure was.
So this
Sure, you can be a monk. Sure, yeah, no problem.
Yeah, he's been wanting that for 10 years, right? So,
Well, he got his wish.
yeah. So he came from roughly this area over here up to Bec in that process of travel. And that was his first entry into monastic life. And then in 1063, he left Bec for Caen, which was about 100 miles west. And he was eventually chosen to be the prior because of his reputation for great intellectual ability and sincere piety. And he took on the task of instructing the monks, and still had time for rigorous spiritual exercises, meditation, prayer, and writing. And eventually wrote some significant things at the time in terms of philosophy and theology. He became well known and respected in the monastic community, where his moral, religious life, his intensity of devotions, and asceticism. Wouldn't be surprised he was ascetic he wanted to all his life. He wrote several books at the time. that were considered significant. De Verite on truth, De Libertate, Arbitrii, gosh, gotta get my Latin going here, on freedom of choice, De Casu Diaboli on the fall of the devil, and De Grammatico, I can only assume was a grammar book.
Yes, that's what it looked like.
So under Anselm's leadership, Beck became a center of monastic learning and theological questioning.
Hmm.
Then in 1070, he began to write prayers and meditations, which he sent to monastic friends and noble women for use in their own private devotions.
You got to remember, by this time, the Normans had, where he's living, they've conquered England.
Right. Yes. Yeah, he was involved with William the Conqueror, actually. And William the Conqueror established the monastery he was at in Caen, actually just a few years before. It was a brand new monastery when he came up there and eventually became abbot. But you're right. And there is definitely a connection there because he eventually becomes Bishop of Canterbury. And it's because of that connection with William the Conqueror. You're right on the money with the history there, Peter.
Yeah, well,
He wrote a book called the Monologion, the monologue. And this monologue, he wrote a logical argument for the existence of God. It was different than prior arguments for the existence of God, which were always appealing to prior authorities like Aristotle or other philosophers, where he tried to use logic alone to prove that God existed. And it became a significant paper. So he did a lot of writing anyway. It was considered significant theologically and philosophically. And there's just to show you where Caen was. So he only had to drive an hour and a half to get to Caen from Beck.
Yeah, right.
This is that same monastery today.
Wow.
It was when he became abbot. It was only like 4 years old, so obviously it didn't look like this yet. But this is what this is the same location where he was abbot.
Just gonna put clothes on and then I'm gonna just move that chair there. Go sit.
It was established by William the Conqueror. It is now called the Abbey of Saint Etienne.
Saint Stephen.
18.
Etienne.
That's Saint Stephen.
William the Conqueror is actually buried here. Construction of that site began in 1066, and I think he became abbot in 1070, if I remember correctly. So it was still pretty brand new. No, 1078. He was unanimously elected abbot of the monastery. And of course, like I said, William Conqueror was the benefactor and the reason it was built. Well, in 1092, Anselm then traveled to England, where Lanfranc, who was his previous mentor, Lanfranc had been previously Archbishop of Canterbury. And this episcopal seat was kept vacant at that time. King William Rufus would have been King of Kent, probably.
I have a question on the funding of a monastery at that time. You said there William the Conqueror was a benefactor, so obviously he gave money. Did they raise money by selling? Did they grow food and then sell it, or did they? How did they fund it generally?
War bond.
What?
War
bonds. No, I meant the monastery itself.
Well, at that in medieval Europe, the kingdom and the church were so very closely intertwined and connected that the kingdoms of Europe would have supported the church with their wealth, whatever kingdom wealth there was.
Yeah. Okay.
So they would designate royal monies to going to places like this. Many times in many European countries, there were like monasteries built or repaired, and it came under just the kingdom finances.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
But as with King Rufus, who was the son and successor of William the Conqueror, it went both ways because Rufus kept the seat open so he could collect the income instead of it going to the bishop. So it kind of went both ways. Sometimes they would drain money from the church. Sometimes they would put money into it. So you just never know. It certainly depended on the ruler at the time and what their needs were and how many wars they were going into. I mean, that's the reason King Henry VIII tore apart the church. He was looking for money for his wars. He sold off all the riches the church had.
Yep.
So Anselm was proposed to be the new bishop, and the king didn't really like that idea because he liked the income, and Anselm didn't like the idea because he didn't want to be bishop. He liked being the monastery leader. But he went up there to visit England, and at one of those visits, he was named the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1093. So that's how Anselm, the Italian fellow, eventually made his way to Canterbury.
Hmm.
One of the things that caught my attention about Anselm is he had also written, like he'd also written about God as mother and Jesus as mother, like Julian of Norwich had. Although he was about 200 years before Julian. So I thought it was interesting that in that general time frame, early medieval time, there was still some thought about that concept of God as mother. Anyway, Anselm refused to be consecrated as archbishop because William had stolen some of the lands from the church. And also there was debate over who the real pope was. There was Pope Clement III versus Pope Urban II, both claiming to be pope. And so Anselm wanted King William to recognize the one he thought was the rightful pope. And he wanted the lands to be restored to Canterbury, to the cathedral, as opposed to the king owning it. So he refused to be consecrated. But William had become sick, and in fear of dying, he agreed to the conditions. And then he got better, and so he wanted to recant it. And so he tried to demand some money from Anselm from the cathedral, and Anselm refused because he said it would look like simony, which is payment for an ecclesiastical position. And so at that point, Anselm refused to allow William refused to allow Anselm to go to Rome to receive a pallium. A pallium is a mantle from the Pope that is a symbol of approval of the archbishop appointment. So there was all this bickering between the king and the bishop, which seems to be a common theme throughout history.
Do you all realize that his father had wanted him to go into politics?
You're right.
I'm sure his father was long dead, but here was his son.
Yeah, right. There, you're absolutely right. I never saw that. Right. Going into politics whether he wanted to or not, right?
Some destinies cannot be designed.
Right.
Used.
I hope his father was still alive to see all this, to see the irony.
Oh.
Anselm said that the king had no right to interfere in ecclesiastical matters, and this became a big part of what was called the Investiture Controversy, which was an ongoing conflict at the time between whether a secular ruler or the Pope had the primary right to decide ecclesiastical authority, in particular a bishop. Because as we know, kings often appointed bishops, but It really should be the decision of the church, not of the king.
Well,
At that
yeah,
time in medieval Europe, kings often did that.
yeah.
And this was a controversy that lasted a couple centuries. Well, from 1076 to 1122. And it was basically the Pope and the church versus the monarchy of the Holy Roman Empire, the German monarchs who usually ruled the Holy Roman Empire. So this is just about the conflict between those two things. It's verbose. Let me skip through this. Yeah, Pope Gregory versus Henry IV, the Holy Roman Emperor.
We're not getting anything on the screen, David.
You're not? Okay. Well, just a summary of what I just said. Let me try it again here. What about now?
No.
Huh. Okay. Let's see.
It's switched. When you put up, that's
Now
better.
you got,
Oh,
that's
how-
good.
Yeah,
That's better.
Okay. So anyway, in 1095, so in this conflict, the bishops and the Synod of Rockingham actually decided with the king against Anselm, surprisingly. And when the papal legate brought the pallium, Anselm refused to accept it. So it would appear that he owed his spiritual and ecclesiastical authority to the king. Then William permitted Anselm to leave for Rome to get the pallium, but of course when he left, he seized the lands of Canterbury again. So then he went to Italy and presented his grievances against the king to Urban II. He also took an active part in sessions defending the doctrine of the filioque, which, this is 1050, this is 1095, so this is just 40 years after the Great Schism between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox. Filioque was one of those sticking points on the creed where we say God, proceeds from the Son and the Father versus just from, and they had it from the Son, from the Holy Spirit who proceeds from the Son, from the Father and the Son. And the Eastern Orthodox say, and from the Son was added in, and it has theological significance. I have never understood as many times as I tried to read or understand it. I don't get why it's significant. But this was a symbolic sticking point in the schism between the two churches. So he got involved in that debate that was still going on. Again, the significance here is he also not just politically significant, but he had some philosophical and theological impact on the church at the time. The church, or the Orthodox Church, rejected the filioque. St. Anselm sided with Rome. Anyway, when he left England for this journey, he took an incomplete work of Cur Deus Homo, Why Did God Become Man? And finished it in 1099. The work became a classic treatment of what's called the satisfaction theory of redemption, which is one of his major contributions to theology. There's been different philosophical viewpoints on redemption, and his was called the satisfaction theory. And he explained this redemption as based on a feudal structure of society in which he lived in a feudal structure. Finite humanity committed a sin against God, and humanity could never make satisfaction to the infinite God, could only expect eternal death. And the satisfaction theory argues that because of the injustice and disorder brought about by sin, life, and death, the resurrection of Christ was given to make reparations or restitution for sin. So this is one of the attempts to explain redemption. There were other kinds of theories about redemption. And basically they're all metaphors to try to explain the process.
I have to love you and leave you.
Oh, is it that time already? Okay.
And does church start? Doesn't start till 10.
See
See you
you.
next week, Peter, hopefully in person.
Yep. Have a good week, everybody.
You
You
too.
too. Just 3 of us now. I think that issue has really never been solved, has it?
Not really. I was looking it up. There's been multiple different theories through the years, and I can't even say there's one predominant one in which
Mhm.
everybody buys in today. His explanation of redemption replaced one called Christus Victor theory, in which Jesus Christ dies in order to defeat the evil powers of sin and death and the devil. Which reminds me of, you remember the kind of the predominant viewpoint of Christ prior to Julian of Norwich and St. Anselm talk about God as mother, was they looked at him as a warrior conquering sin and death.
Right.
So that it played into their viewpoint of atonement. How does atonement happen, or what's the process of atonement? And that also replaced a theory called the ransom theory. It was a debt owed to the devil. And in a way, it's all kind of just semantics and
Yeah.
and metaphors and trying to explain what happens with atonement. And who really knows? I think it's one of the mysteries of the church that we will never really understand.
Yeah.
I mean, you try to put metaphors to it, try to understand it, but what's the value in that other than just trying to put your head around it?
Honestly, do we need to decide?
I don't think so. No. I agree with you. I don't think we need to know. It doesn't matter. But I guess it matters to theologians, and so they have something to write about.
What is that thing about counting how many angels can get on the head of?
Right. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, okay, fine, not.
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. But
That's good.
I guess the point is that this was some of his contributions to theology, and other theologians through the centuries have referred back to him and used his writings in their own. And so he was a significant contributor to theology. And theology has its usefulness, but you're right, it also has its limitations in terms of practical daily living, unless you're another theologian that wants to write about it. In that vein, he also wrote something that was called the ontological argument. It was a logic-based proof, I put finger quotes around proof, of the existence of God. And really the significance to this too also is it has often been referred to or written about by other theologians and philosophers through the centuries. So he wrote something that was memorable and gave other people fodder to write about and talk about. But this ontological argument is here. He says God is by definition the greatest conceivable being. This is obvious because if one can conceive of a being greater than God, then that being would be God. If God exists only in the mind, something greater than God can be conceived, a God who exists in the actual world. But if God is the greatest conceivable being, so definitionally, we cannot conceive of anything greater than God. God must then be a being that exists not only in the mind, but also in reality. Therefore, God exists.
I feel like I'm in one of those mazes where you get to a juncture and you say, do you go this way or this way? Because you know where you want to end up.
It is just a bunch of mental gymnastics. You're absolutely right.
Mhm.
And it's not really any kind of proof.
No.
In fact, he even in his day, he received criticism. There was another philosopher who took his same argument and applied it to an island. And he said, there's the greatest island that ever existed. It's called a pieland. And he applied the same mental gymnastics to prove that pieland exists.
Okay.
So, he received. So the significance of his little ontological argument is not that it actually proves existence of God, because it doesn't, but it became a topic for other theologians and philosophers to talk about. The other significant thing about it is he was the first person to try to argue for the existence of God outside of just relying on prior famous philosophers and theologians. He was trying to use logic alone. And this was a part of what was called the scholastic school of thought, which became a very prominent school of thought in medieval Christianity, in which we became to rely more on logical arguments to try to understand God and Christianity. So it became very influential line of thinking. Not that this argument, ontological argument itself was all that good, but just that it contributed to overall, the schools of thought and theology. And, for those inclined to believe in God, Anselm's logic is rarely seen as powerful or compelling. But it, like I said, it's other theologians have referred to it. Thomas Aquinas, Rene Descartes, all these people have often referred to him in their own writings. So he was significant in the theological circles. In fact, the Catholic Church gave him the title of Scholastic Doctor, which the Roman Catholic Church has only given Doctor of the Church to a limited number of people who contributed significantly. So his writings were considered theologically significant. Anyway, I thought he was kind of an interesting character.
Yeah.
He definitely had some impact on medieval Christianity.
I'm looking at this painting of him. Is this the pallium that he would be wearing?
Probably, yeah.
I'm also looking at what is the animal in the crook that he's holding up. That would be some symbol dealing with his rank, I presume.
Squirrel.
It's not a dove.
Yeah, I can't tell what that is.
Squirrel.
Oh, no.
So David, do you think we're going to be meeting at was it Dudley House?